All right, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another one of our Insider Series events. Thank you to everyone who has joined us before, and if this is your first time joining us, welcome and thanks for coming. We started these webinars as a way for loyal donors and members of our ChildFund community, like all of you, to hear a bit more about the wide breadth of work and programming that we do, and to hear from some of our amazing program specialists who really help to guide our programming worldwide. Today, we are going to hear from two of my colleagues, Radwa el Manssy and Joan Lundgren. They are going to talk to us a little bit about and just have a great conversation about how we respond to emergencies and crisis situations, and how we do so with a specific focus on children who, as we all know, are always the most vulnerable group in any crisis. So before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please feel free to interact with others in the chat. You'll see two options. You can either communicate with just us panelists or to everyone that's here. And then at the end of the webinar, we're going to have about a 10 to 15 minute Q&A portion. So if you have questions throughout Joan and Radwa's conversation, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during this. And if we don't get to all the questions, we will send answers during our follow-up. So thank you all for joining, and I'm going to turn it over to Joan and Radwa.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks to everyone for joining today. I am especially delighted to have this conversation with one of my favorite colleagues. Radwa, as Erin mentioned, is ChildFund's Director of Protecting Children in Crisis. She has over 20 years of experience in the humanitarian sector, working with refugees, migrants, and others who've been displaced within their country because of conflict and war or natural disasters. She focuses especially on the needs of children, youth, and women. And prior to coming to ChildFund, Radwa was with the International Rescue Committee. And with IRC, she was part of the partnership with Sesame Workshop of Sesame Street fame that won the MacArthur Foundation's first $100 million prize competition. Quite an accomplishment, and such amazing work has come out of that. I have been so lucky to have worked with Radwa these last few years on a couple of projects. I've been so impressed with her passion, expertise, and her grit. And we, in addition to working closely together, we've bonded over the trials and tribulations of parenting preteens. So, Radwa, I just spoke a little bit about
I am blushing. I'm blushing. Thank you.
Well, it's all true. I just, of course, spoke a little bit about your professional work, but tell us about you. You're based in Cairo. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and really how you came to this important work.
Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone and for your time. So my name is Radwa el Manssy. I know it's quite funky name, but I'm Egyptian American, and I always say my heart is divided between the US and Egypt because I have lived in both countries, worked in both countries. So I have, it is really a privilege, I think, to have this experience. So my name in Arabic, just like for you to remember, it means the forgotten top of the mountain. And I feel like it's so much telling of my work. So when crisis hits, we always focus on front lines, gains, or losses, and we kind of forget about the children and their families and the individualism that each of these bring during a crisis. These are children who attended school and stopped attending school. These are children who used to have a playground and they did not have a playground. These are children who has very stressed parents because of what is happening around them. And this is why I was able to connect very much to this work early in my career, because I felt like I was never a refugee. I always been a very outspoken girl and a woman. So even though girls and women always want and need to be supported. But I always remember when I was a child, when my parents were struggling parenthoods, and I was struggling growing up. And that's why I connect very much with the mission of ChildFund, which is a very much child-focused organization.
That's great. Thank you. And can you tell us about the scope of your work at ChildFund?
Yeah.
The Director of Protecting Children in Crisis is a big title and it's important work, but what does it really entail?
And so it is a big title, but at the end, it is very simple. It's not going to be simple work, but it's the way that we organize the work is all around children. So I lead the global effort to protect vulnerable children. And I will speak a little bit about that during crises. And crises here are not only wars. And even though that I've seen a lot of borders in my life, but I also seen a lot of destruction happening because of climate change or because of violence within the community where children and families are forced to leave their houses. So these are all type of crises around the world. It's not only the big, large humanitarian crises that we see in the news. These are everyday events that is happening in our communities. And my role is to help country offices to design and manage program to put these children and their families to safety, meaning that in the short term, we provide safe spaces for children. We make sure that there are specialized individuals who can listen and heal and make sure that the children are mentally capable of overcoming these crises, also helping them with livelihoods option if possible, and in the longer term, helping children to access school, either formal or informal. Big part of my job is to secure and manage the funds, but also for our donors and our people that we are accountable for, because they are giving us generously their time, effort, attention, and money. But also, I spend a lot of my time focusing on our clients who are the affected population, listening to them, making sure that our programs are designed for their needs and our programs are tailored for the most vulnerable. And when we talk about the most vulnerable, and believe it or not, so in terms of crises, all children will be vulnerable, and there are sub-vulnerability. So children who have disability, caregivers with children with disability, girls, and so these are all vulnerabilities that we try to design the program to make sure that they are not forgotten and they are accessing these type of services that we're providing in this difficult time.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about safe spaces as an approach and as kind of it's somewhat of a signature. It's very common in the context where we're working in our approach to supporting children in crisis. And I'm sure a lot of our audience members have heard us talk about safe spaces and the importance, but if you could kind of give us some more detail and some examples, that would be great.
Sure. So I want to paint you a picture of a safe space. So a safe space is not, it's not like a space, it's more of an approach where we have under a tree or a tent or within a classroom, a group of specialized, usually very young professionals, by the way, paying a very attentive to the needs of children and their families. So it is a space within the community, and we work with the community to identify this space. So we don't come in and say, oh, we're going to construct a new space. It is a space within the community. We're providing professionals, and these professionals are providing support to the children. And some of this support could be, and children and youth. So we are extending as well to youth because they are a very important demographic, especially during crises, because we have a large number of unaccompanied and separated minors. And these are children that choose, or their families send them away for safety. Basically, they're telling them, just cross this border or just walk to this country because your safety is at risk. So we are receiving a lot number of this. So this is a space within a very chaotic time where we are providing psychosocial support. Basically, we're providing someone to listen to children and address and talk to them and make sure that to tell them that what they are going through, there are so many children that are going through, and they will succeed. And this is a very powerful talk, even if it's just a talk. It is just give them this self-esteem and help them to kick on the resilience, because children are so resilient. So this is one of the activities that we're doing as part of the safe space. We're providing them with non-formal education just to make sure that they are not skipping a large number of schools, a large number of lessons. We're also helping them to form friendship. And I have a couple of pictures here I can provide you where there is a space where we bring children together to form this peer-to-peer support. And it's quite important for their, if you can you move a couple of slides to the friendship, because I really want to paint a picture. So here is me with a very poofy hair, in Mexico. And this is one of our child-friendly spaces or safe spaces in Mexico, actually in Tapachula. And this space where it's inside the community, it's inside what we call a communal house. So this is like a house where there's so many rental spaces for people that have been forced out of their houses. And I love this because you can see 3 children here. One speaks Haitian and the other speaks Spanish, and they're best friends. And I don't know how they communicate. I kept on asking them, but they bonded so much on this crisis. They use so many techniques that we provide them in the safe space, like crayons and papers, to explain their feelings. And they have such a strong and powerful connection. These children are not, and even though shelter, so having a shelter, having a livelihood, having health is quite important. But just having this quiet space where families know that their children are safe, where they are looking for other services, is such a powerful tool that we have across all our countries. So we set up these spaces whenever a crisis happens within the first 72 hours. Sometimes it takes us more than that in a war zone. But usually it is such easy because it's box of crayons, some scissors, just providing safety, looking for the children, bringing them together, having a trained worker who can listen, refer to the different services, and help children to kick on this resilience. So we are not helping them, we're just igniting this resilience within them, which is quite different.
Yeah, that is so important. So it's a physical space, but it's also what we're doing within that space to support children,
Exactly.
and really support their mental health through crisis. It's so important. Another term that I think some of our longtime supporters have heard, which is a pretty common term in our work, is children on the move. Which of course refers to children who have been forced from their homes, but are in transit, are not settled permanently somewhere, and are often facing a big unknown. And you might have more recent statistics, but I think in 2022, there were over 43 million children on the move in the world, and 60% of them were forced from their homes because of conflict. Can you talk again a little bit more about our work with children on the move, what strategies we're using to help children and families that are forced from their homes?
Sure. So I think Children on the Move really sets us as ChildFund apart from other organizations. Other organizations, they come in when crisis hits, but Children on the Move, the strategy is looking beyond the crisis or in transit. We're trying to help children from the beginning to have safer communities, because as you have safer communities, you will reduce the probability of what we call irregular migration. In Child Fund, we believe that movement is a right for everyone, and this is a safeguarded a humanitarian principle all around the world. But what we do not support is irregular migration, where children are smuggled or trafficked. And this is large of our portfolio focuses on what we call pre-migration cycle, where we identify very violent communities and we work within school systems and communities and with parents and others to make sure that they have a safer community. The second stage that we have is the transit. And the transit is that we have along many borders, safe spaces where we are receiving children, but we are providing not only mental health process, but also what we call specialized protection. And what do we mean as specialized protection? As children moving from one country to the other, remember what I've mentioned, these are people, right? And they are stumble around very difficult times as they are moving. Sometimes they are walking, sometimes they are taking a train or taking a bus or a caravan. All of this subjugate them to great amount of violence. We receive a lot of girls who are gender-based violent, who has been violated along the way, children who has been abused, children who has been very tired. And our work is to provide these children with the needs that they have. Needs meaning if it's medical, if it's legal, and of course mental health, but also looking for their parents if they are coming alone, making sure that they are safe, looking for a shelter, and so on. So this is one of the most complicated programs that we do under Children on the Move, and it's a lot of our bulk. But also we have this third stage where if children and their families decided to settle in one of the countries, we provide them with a lot of community-based support and government support to help them settle, find a livelihood, make sure that they are reintegrated back to the communities, and also trying to support communities to accept the children without xenophobia or discrimination. So these are the type of programming that we do in Children on the Move. It doesn't really focus on the crisis, but it focuses on the magnitude of the problem. And we address different types of children. And people just realize that maybe Children on the Move is only in the Americas, but I just want to tell you that children and their families are moving across the world, and violence is happening across the world. We have a flagship program in Uganda where people are crossing from Sudan to Uganda. We have also another program in Uganda where when children are moving from the north to the south just for safety. And I just want to bring, if you allow me, if I'm not speaking too much, but can I bring another picture up, please, Erin? Can you help me? I'm gonna give you a story about this. I'm so sorry for the low quality of photos. They're on my phone, and I don't clean my lenses, so here it is. So
no, that's okay.
So one of the really touching stories that I have for you, with just to illustrate how children and families are moving. Either they are refugees or they're internally displaced. So this is an internal displacement, and I will tell you what is it. So St. Mary's Hospital, this is a hospital in Uganda where we set a safe space, I think in the 90s. So it's not even during my time. I cannot take a credit around that. And what happened is that Uganda has faced 20 years of civil war between the North and the South. And what happened is that we had some children called the night crawlers, where the children at night they leave their houses and they move into safe shelters to make sure that they are not abducted by militias to fight in the war. And flashback 20 years, like in 2020, before COVID hits, I meet a person who's same age as I am, and he said that I am one of the night crawlers, and because of ChildFund, I was not I was safe. I was not abducted, and my family in every night they send me to St. Mary's Hospital and make sure. And ChildFund was very kind; they were around supporting our mental health, addressing if there any abuse, making sure that we have all the services. And I just like I cannot take credit of this because it's owned by ChildFund, but it's just such a powerful example of how how can we change one life and how can we save one life with a very simple intervention.
That's amazing. What an incredible story. And you're right. We talk about, I think we talk a lot about strategy and approaches and everything, and then to know the real impact it's had on a person is really incredible. Thank you. We might want to continue with these pictures because my next question was just to ask you, what are some of the current crises that we're responding to today?
So the believe I mean crises is very much attached to the news, right? So Ukraine, of course, is one of the biggest crises that we have been faced for the past 2 years. We are supporting through an alliance effort, and I will speak about this later on. Basically, we are operating through our partners to make sure that many of what we have spoke about is in places where children can reach. So we talked about safe spaces, but in Ukraine, for example, our support is more around education and around water and sanitation, to have access of water and sanitation. And this is through our partners. So we implement in coordination with the partners that are in place. We have also existence in the Middle East, in Lebanon, and we can talk about it. And this is our partner, WeWorld. And WeWorld is providing incredible work. We have around 1.6 million families that have been displaced in Lebanon just in the past few months. And WeWorld is providing through our coordination and support water and sanitation, like water points and water trucks, but also providing food, shelter, and mental health support for several children. But I just want to tell you, Joanne, that many of the crises that we're responding to are not in the news. And this is incredible because, for example, we are very active in Ethiopia, where that there is a conflict that is going on, and there are around 2 million internally displaced people around in Ethiopia. So we are working in there. We're expanding in Sahel, which is not in the news at all. And Sahel, it is the west side of Africa, where you can find Cote d'Ivoire and Benin, Burkina Faso, Niger, where you have controlled militia of the government, and many children are now being abducted and part of the armed forces of the militias. There are crises in Afghanistan overall. We are not participating, but we have a support there. Rohingya crisis, which has disappeared from the news. So we have, of course, in the Fodor, we have a large number of internally displaced people and in Central America because of the Venezuela crisis, and refugees because of the Venezuela crisis. All of these are crises that are not solved. They are just forgotten. And but we don't forget them. I mean, this is and that's why we need your support, like people that are listening in. Actually, the large crises are receiving more of the funding. These crises that are quite forgotten from the news, children are still there. Children are still suffering. Children are not back to home. And we need your support in them as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Some of the worst crises or the worst situations for children are these ongoing crises, right? The kind of slow burn crises, and also reoccurring crises where conflict is it kind of settles down a little bit and then flares up, or it's a recurring natural disaster. I want to just kind of go back to something you mentioned with our ChildFund Alliance. And again, a lot of folks on the phone probably know this, but ChildFund International, based in the US, is part of a larger alliance. So while we lead programming in about 23 countries, we are a part of work and supporting work, and particularly supporting emergency response around the globe in over 70 countries. So it's we are, if there is a crisis happening and it's impacting children, we are probably supporting it in some way. One of the things, I know I do want to get to questions in a couple of minutes, but one of the things I like to ask, well, it's kind of a two-parter. Radwa, if you had unlimited resources for your job, if someone came in and wrote you or gave you a blank check, I won't even give you an amount, but gave you a blank check, what would you do? What are the first things that you would do to help children?
So my first thing that I would do is that I would train more people on how to protect, listen, I identify children who has been abused to make sure that they are receiving the appropriate services. I would reach out to more families to make sure that they are well trained to support parenting for children and make sure that the violence is not because of home. I will work with communities to make them safer. I would advocate with government to not politicize internal displacement, refugees, or movements, because it's humanity. And when children and families feel unsafe, they will move, and it's okay. It happens to all of us. If you have a blackout, you will move to your parents' house or you move to a friend's house. So imagine if there is a violence in the community and there is so I would really advocate with government to make them understand that people don't like to leave their houses. People, if you leave it to them, they will love to stay in their houses and they would love to stay in their communities. But we need to improve the conditions for them to stay in their communities, to feel more safe. I would invest in technology for the AI to make sure that our services are reaching the hard to reach communities. So believe it or not, sometimes we cannot access communities because of militia control or because of we are unable just to get there because of climate change has changed the demographic and destroyed the roads. So yeah, I would do that. You're on mute.
That my sticky button there. I do have a follow-up question. You talked about working with governments, and that is something that's so important to us. We have strong relationships with government bodies where we work. But it also speaks to the importance of partnerships with local organizations, with other international organizations. Can you just speak quickly about that and the importance of partnership generally?
Yeah. So, and this is also what sets us apart as an organization. So it's not about the services that we're providing in the short term. Of course, there is immediate needs that we need to support, but we work very hard with government, civil society, partner organization to empower them to take on this role. So it's not always us, but we make sure that there is a sustainability aspect to it. And we were able to do this in so many countries, and this is bulk of our work. And how can we make sure the governments in partnership have more welcoming policies that accommodates for children on the move or children in crises? that we have the appropriate service to make sure that they're addressing their needs. And their needs is not only health and shelter. Their needs is education, it is mental health, it is making sure that you have a legal documentation, that if you have an abused child, he is able to access appropriate services to kick in this resilience, and make sure that children that are traveling alone or are in countries alone are within family settings, because this is what we're promoting, right? The best place for a child is in a family setting. And that's a lot of our work as well. So we work with government, civil society in building their capabilities to take on this role, even after we're gone. And it really worked so, like, we could not believe it in COVID. Like in COVID, where we are all restricted movement, our communities, the communities that we have invested in, they were working. They were distributing cash. They were looking after the children. They were providing educational support. So this is the best investment that we could do. And that's why there is a lot of emphasis of our work on making sure that these entities that are localized are able to provide the support for children when we are not there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, ChildFund works in partnership in everything that we do in some capacity. But I think in crises, it's even more important that organizations are working together, that they are leaning into their expertise. And I think for us to really focus on child protection and making sure that children are safe and supported is really important. Well, we do have a couple of questions popping up, so I'm going to move to them, and I'll just remind everyone, if you have questions for Radwa, please put them in the Q&A box down below. Our first question is, what does ChildFund do differently when responding to emergencies versus long-term crises? Good question.
Yeah. So emergencies, immediate needs. So what we do is that we come in. This is what we call an onset emergency. And sorry for using the term that we use globally. But basically, once an emergency hits, we we do a needs assessment, and we try to address immediate needs with boots on the ground. So this is meaning providing safe spaces, mental health, identification and referral, making sure that children are safely in within their families, trying to work on prevention of GBV or addressing gender-based violence if it occurs. We do a lot of distribution of kits, non-food items, and also dignity kits. So dignity kits are specialized for women and girls, and basically they have hygiene kits, and they have small things like we lose in crises, brushes, and all of that. And so it is really around addressing immediate needs. Our long-term crises is quite different. We look is more specialized, and this is where we have services that are providing ongoing support, specifically focused on gender-based violence and child protection violence, children who has been highly affected or abused. And this becomes our focus, where we are providing them with mental health support, but more importantly with services. And the services are either health or moving them to a safe space. And safe space is not the child-friendly space. Safe spaces could be kinship, it could be an alternative family setting, or a governmental institution, which is something that we don't promote, but sometimes we use. We work very closely with government to have these services provided by the government, not provided by us. So our role is quite inverted. It becomes more of a technical support of the government and civil society, and making sure that they are establishing these specialized child protection services for these vulnerable population. We also address other sectors. So for example, in long-term crises, livelihood is very much connected to child protection. In order to make a child and their family safe, you need to make sure that you're building this resilience and their economic power. So many of our projects is really focused on this youth agency, making access to employment, access to self-empowerment, and so on. So this is the add-on during long-term crises.
Great, thank you. Another question we got through the chat is, how do you engage local communities in supporting children?
This is my favorite question because this is our work. So whenever we are doing any of the things that I've mentioned, we do it within the community. And our community engagement does not only start in the design, but also throughout the implementation. And let me explain a little bit what does that mean. So we have a strong partnership with community. ChildFund already works with 300 communities around the world. But what if a crisis occur in a community that we don't have existence? So we start by building up a design. So we do the needs assessment. So we do joint assessment with community. We identify community members who are champions to make sure that they are part of identifying the needs. We hire, so if we do immediate service provision, we do a lot of hiring within the community. So we never bring like workers from other communities. We always hire within the pool, within the community. And we make sure that we have what we call accountability mechanisms. These are mechanisms within the community to be able to listen. And these are simple things. These are boxes within the community, or sometimes we do outreach. We ask them how do they think of our services, how to improve, and so on. So we have, community approach is not a community approach. It's like what we aim for, it's this community ownership. Working with civil society also empower them to be able to be prepared and respond. So as I mentioned, we have 300 communities that we work on, and we have a program called the Stopgate Programming, where we make sure that communities themselves understand what are the danger that can face the children, and they develop themselves their own mitigation and programming to stop this danger. So for example, in Sahel, where we are expanding now, communities know that there is a danger of abduction of armed forces, where they are taking children to participate in the fights. So now communities are developing their own, for example, simple things that we did in COVID, by the way. So they do community watch at night. They make sure that one family is hosting a group of children every night. And these are simple strategies that we empower communities to develop these strategies. It's not imposed, but it's within. And this is very, very hard work, because it's easier to, it's like a ready meal. A ready meal would be much easier, right? But cooking the meal, it takes us a lot of time, effort, and resources. But we know it's sustainable, and we know that it is just according to humanitarian principle, and it's just right.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I'm going to jump around, so I'm kind of grouping some similar questions together.
Mm-hmm.
So folks on the line, don't worry, we will get to your questions. But this one is, I think, you can maybe carry on from the one you just answered. It's a really good question. How do you know or decide when it's time to move out of an area where we are responding?
Yeah, so I always tell the program teams that safe spaces, especially safe spaces, are meant to be closed, which is heartbreaking. We close them because they are meant to bridge the gap between the community and the schools that are shut. And once the school system is kicked in, we gradually shut this program down, which is quite difficult. We know that the communities are ready to take ownership when we have a strong civil society and a government and local government who has a good understanding of child protection, but also have services for children. They have trained social workers or counselors. They have trained communities. By the way, in some communities, they tap on mothers to become the ones who do the identification and referral. And we have this in Mexico, for example, where we have a group of mothers who organize themselves and decide to protect children. By the way, we all do that. I think it's not rocket science. Like, we all have these groups where we are organizing play dates, talking about the bully in the school. We are just providing communities with the ability, or just re-igniting their will to protect their children. So once this established, we gradually move on. We also work on advocacy, which is quite a big part of our work. So we work with government to allocate the appropriate resources for the services to protect and make children safe, and make schools welcoming, and having informal education. So these are all signs for us to say that this community has ownership. And I always use ownership because it's not communities who are faced with crises. You cannot tell them, oh, you have to be resilient. You have to support them, and you should not be pushing the burden to them. And this is what we do. We are working with them to identify already existing strategies. But in time of desperation, people just forget that they can organize, or they can have these services, and so on.
Yeah, so much of what you described is really the definition of community, and what we're doing is providing the resources and support to enable it to form, to come together, to support each other. Okay, how do you work with local schools and educators to support refugee children's education and integration? So I believe the question here is with host communities who are receiving refugees or displaced families. How do we work with the local communities to ensure that children coming in are able to receive an education?
Yeah, it's one of our biggest programs, actually. So one of our biggest programs is around access to education after settlement, right? After there is an internal displacement. So what we do is, and this is in partnership, and important strategies that we work on is fighting xenophobia. And this is the biggest enemy for any refugee, migrant, or internally displaced, which is quite funny, because people think that people outside the country are the ones that are facing xenophobia. But believe me, people from the same country can also have xenophobia. And I know that you probably know this, right? Because of your accent, maybe your skin color, and so on. So we work closely with government, with the schools on three aspects. One is making sure that they have an outreach programming to reach out these vulnerable groups. Two, we do a lot of education campaigns within the community where we're inviting both the children on the move and their families, whether it's refugees, IDP, and others, making sure that there is a bridge classes to make sure that the children are able to mainstream in the education system, work with teachers. And this is one of our biggest impact. Our program has helped teachers. 93% of our teachers had just better mental health, because can you imagine, the classes are expanding and they have to accommodate for the different education needs of different children in host communities, like different education background, and just it's an overload. So we do a lot of mental health support for teachers, not only for children, and it is very beneficial. We work with them in fighting xenophobia. We work with communities collectively, but we also work with government to have proper resources and policies to make sure that the children are not separated. Some countries think that, for example, if you have a different school for refugees and migrants or IDP, that would be helpful. Could be the most harmful impact of any crisis. So we work with government to make sure that the classes and the schools are inclusive and are able to absorb this large number, whether it is financial support, but also through training and other means.
That's so important. Something we've seen here in the US too, with children arriving here and the strains on schools and teachers. Teachers who want desperately to help, but sometimes need some support to do so. So these last two questions are both of them are multi-parters. So I'm going to try to put them into one because we're just about at time. But someone asked how we decide where funds are directed. Separate question is, what are some of the biggest financial challenges our program faces? So maybe you could think about those together. And the first question was also asking if someone could provide funding toward children on the move or a specific emergency response. I will answer that quickly and say yes to both. Both are options. We do have some kind of pooled funds for emergency response children on the move, where Radwa and team will direct resources to where they are needed most, the most urgent needs. But folks who are really want to address a specific crisis, we can also direct funds there as well. So Radwa, maybe you could take that first part. How do you decide? What are some of the financial challenges? And then what can supporters do to help?
So I talked so much about communities and government. So we don't decide. We work with governments, communities, and peers to identify the needs. So the first thing that we do, so that's why the pool funding is quite important to us, you guys. So if you want to help us, whenever a crisis happens, or even a long-term crisis, we kick off a needs assessment. And needs assessment, this is where we work with community to identify how to better allocate the funds and the resources. And this is one of the biggest roles and responsibility that I manage. Like, this is my biggest headache every day. This not only, so the rapid assessment is not only in the design. As I mentioned, we do a lot of check-ins within the community to make sure that the funds are appropriately distributed, and we have, of course, in ChildFund specifically, we have very strong policy and procedures for fraud and corruption. So this is something that we take very seriously. We have a whistleblower. We make sure that people are aware of it at the community level. And we do report as well. We have a reporting system where we report back to our donors on how we allocated these funds. One of the main challenges that we face in terms of funding, that people in crises would like always to spend the money on food, like in physical shelters and in medical supplies. And I think these are life-saving. I'm not saying that we should not be spending. We should be spending on them in a crisis. But I think less and less, we pay less attention to children who has been abused and women who has been abused, less attention to the mental health of teachers and mental health of children. And I just want to say that protection is a life-saving as well. If you have the most beautiful house and in the US, we have that, right? People are struggling with mental health, and in the US, it is one of the richest countries in the world, right? And people are still struggling because we are not addressing the core. And the core is, if you are abused and I give you a piece of bread, it will mean nothing. You need to have the appropriate services to heal your body and heal your brain. And this is one of the biggest challenges, that people don't see protection as a quite an important sector or a life-saving sector.
Yes, very good. And just to kind of reiterate the second part of that question, what can folks do to help?
You can do so many things. I think each one of us, like in terms of help, we always think of ourselves by in the field and just giving ourselves something tangible to a child or is tangible to a family. I just want the folks here to move out of this. Just contribution of fun, just being in this as well, empathetic with what I'm saying. Just reading about the life stories and understanding more of children. All of this are help. Just making sure that you are supporting the cause is help. So we have so many programs you could help. You can, of course, donate, but also we have volunteer options in the US, by the way. So we can talk about the US program. We have a very strong US program that deals a lot with climate induced crises and migration and so on. So I think it I think I just want to tell people that anything you do, just being here is a help. Because it doesn't have to be this physical. I myself not in the field, which is I always wanted to be in the field. I also have I have a teen, I cannot be in the field all the time. And actually people are doing this on our behalf and it's fine. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Radwa. We try to keep these under an hour, but I did want to give you one opportunity to share a story, a child perhaps that you've met in your work, that was particularly impactful to you.
I don't have a story, to be honest, but I think I mentioned the friendship story, which is I loved very much. I also have another story of a family that we worked in the Americas where a child, so we have an influx of unaccompanied and separated minors. These are children that are going from place to the other alone without their families. And I was so touched by the generosity of people on the move themselves, like families who don't have any means and they accept a child who's alone just to make sure that he is safe and not subjugated to abuse. I think this is just like they themselves need the support, but they have like this kindness in their heart to take another child and share the meal, which is already very little. Because they just simply understand what it takes for a child to be alone in this journey.
Yeah, I think we see that, we see that everywhere when there's the most awful things happening, you do see instances of humanity and people stepping up and giving of themselves. So thank you so much. It's a heavy topic, but it is so important. It's core to what the Child Fund does. And we are so grateful for everything that you do to lead us in this work. I'd also like to thank the team behind the camera, so to speak, the wonderful philanthropy team that puts these sessions together. And I would like to thank everyone who joined us today. And if we did not get to your question, we will follow up with you and try to get you an answer or have a conversation with you about it. You will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's session. Please feel free to watch it again or share it with others that you think might be interested in our work. If you would like to help, as Radwa said, we always need more resources to support the children that we're serving. And we have a number of different options on how to support and where to direct those funds. So please reach out to us. You may contact us through this website or through this email address, philanthropy@childfund.org. Or if you have a philanthropy advisor that you work with, of course, you may reach out to them. None of this work is possible without our partners and our supporters. So we thank you so much. We are grateful for you, for this community that you have formed with us. And we look forward to seeing you at our next Insider Series. Everyone have a great day. Thank you, Radwa.
Bye.